So I was born and raised in Oakland. I'm fifth generation Oakland. My great-great-grandparents came here during the migration of Black folks from the South. They came here from Texas, and they settled in Oakland. So they bought a home, the home we live in. Actually, they bought the home that we live in. My family and I live there now. I live there with my mom and my husband. And so I was born and raised there. I went to school mostly in Alameda, though the neighboring city. I went to private school until the fifth grade. When I was growing up in Oakland, it had been taken over by the government, and Oakland was going through a lot at the time, and so it wasn't. My mom didn't feel that we would get the education that she thought that we deserved. So we went to school in Alameda. I went to high school at Encinal. And I graduated from there and then moved to Fresno with my siblings. I'm the youngest of four siblings, and I have a twin sister, so we are the youngest of four. And so my great grandmother and my aunt and my brother all convinced me to go to Fresno State with my siblings. I think that my mom put them all up to it because she was nervous for me to be by myself. I think maybe as the baby. So I followed my two sisters to Fresno State and ended up thankfully having a really good experience there. So I stayed in Fresno, and I got both of my degrees in Fresno. So one day I went to go see my uncle and like have lunch and sit with him. He was at a facility that was 3 blocks, I think, from my house. So I walked over there and brought him lunch. And we were chatting. And so it turns out that a couple weeks before then, he had been talking to the executive director about his niece that wanted to be a physical therapist. And that was me. And so the executive director came and met me when I came. I was actually kind of shocked that she was interested. And so she offered me the opportunity to kind of come in the summertime and shadow the physical therapist. And so I did. And when I got there, she offered me a job. So I worked there through the summer. And on my lunchtime and during the dinner rush, when I wasn't working, I was following the physical therapist to see what they were doing. But while I was following the physical therapist, I kind of wondered, like, who's that lady, and what is she doing? And then just a few weeks after that, she was replaced or she left and a man came. But I wanted to know still, like, what is he doing and why is he feeding that person? And what are they working on? And so although I was there to follow the physical therapist, I decided to wrap up my kind of experience there. I went back to school. And then in the next summer, they called me back to come and work there again. And so when I went back there, the therapy team essentially said that they felt like I was more of like a speech pathologist because I really like to talk a lot, and they could notice that I was like observing the people there. And so I decided to kind of end up following the speech pathologist. That was my first ever experience, even having heard of a speech pathologist, despite wanting to enter into the therapies. And it was kind of the first time that anybody in my life too had heard of what a speech pathologist was. So I ended up doing a lot of research and found it at Fresno State. Thank goodness. I thought that I wanted to be a pharmacist, but chemistry was a little bit difficult for me, so I decided against pharmacy too. And so I the third time around, landed on speech pathology. And so this was on my second year at Fresno State in the second semester. And so I ended up finding who would become my mentor and made the biggest impact in my life while I was at Fresno State. Her name is Dr. Frances Palmaville. And so in my third year there, I finally started taking major classes. And so it took me 5 years to graduate because I studied abroad while I was there. And so if you wanted to study abroad, you had to stay for the whole year. And so I was like kind of just walking through the halls and I was like, I want to go to London. And so I went to this talk that they were having about being able to sign up for the program. And at the time they were full, but then they added another teacher, which added another section. And so my family really banded together and then collectively were able to send me, mostly my mom and my grandma, were able to send me to London. So I studied there for 3 weeks. It was pretty amazing. We took a class there. We had 2 teachers. And I think there were 40 of us, but they rented a whole building. And I think they partnered with one of the local institutions there. And so we took a winter session class, and It was awesome. While I was there, I went to Ireland with friends for 4 days, and so that was really nice too. But it was, and I think they gave me a scholarship too of $1,000. And so it was kind of the perfect experience, and I think one of the perfect ways for me to leave the country for the first time. And so it was really nice, and it like started my love of traveling. Mm-hmm. I called my mom and was like full blown crying, like, but I can't really do this. But I was already over a year into the program and taking the classes, but I didn't feel like I was good enough. I didn't feel like I would be able to get into the master's program. And if I did get into the master's program, I wasn't sure how we were going to pay for it. Mm-hmm. And so I was really, really deterred. I felt like at the time there were so many things against me staying, but I stayed. And it worked, thank goodness. So after she gave me quite an encouraging conversation, I looked for internships, or not quite internships, but I looked for opportunities to volunteer. And so I ended up volunteering on campus with one of the cochlear implant preschool. Undergraduate. It was a work study program, so I worked through work study on it, and it was pretty amazing. I think it really helped shape my experience. For a while, I thought that I wanted to be a preschool teacher. That didn't last for very long, but I thought that I wanted to be a preschool teacher, which is what led me to Head Start. Mm-hmm. After I got to Head Start, I decided that I kind of wanted to do something more. There was a woman who would come in. She was the speech pathologist, go figure, who would come in. And so after my interest peaked about becoming a speech pathologist, it seemed that I started like seeing speech pathologists everywhere after I found out about it. And so she was coming to work with one of the little girls who had Down syndrome. And so she would allow me to observe her sessions. And so that, of course, continued my love and desire to continue to pursue speech pathology. So my dad passed away unexpectedly, and my great-grandmother passed away, my uncle passed away. So a lot of people, two of my friends committed suicide, so like a lot of people were passing away, and I was like full of grief, and my bandwidth to do anything that wasn't a part of my just regular daily routine was like very minimal. And so I put all my eggs in one basket, and I ended up applying to Fresno State. Thankfully, I got in. But I couldn't work anymore at Jumpstart because I wasn't an undergrad student. So I ended up going on to work I became a resident director at Fresno State. And so I ended up being in charge of a hall and RAs and PSAs, the public safety assistants, and then the resident advisors. And so they paid for 6 of my units to go to school. And then they also paid, of course, for my room and board. And then they paid me every month. And that was the way that I was able to afford my first year of graduate school. Yeah, so I worked through my first year of grad school. Unfortunately, I don't think that there's a lot of understanding of the different socioeconomic statuses of the students that come through graduate programs. And so I was one of 3 people in my class that had a job. And so I remember when I was a senior and at the beginning of graduate school, our professors highly frowning upon people working. So the reality is that graduate school is a lot of work in and of itself. And so the first year of graduate school, you take a bunch of classes. I think we took 5 classes, and then we also had clinic. And clinic lasted anywhere from, I think, 2 to 3 hours a day. And it maybe 2 or 3 times a week, depending on which clinic you had. And so I didn't have a choice. I needed to work. And I remember a part of my job as a resident director is I was on call every 3 weeks, 7 days, 24 hours a day. We had to get a paper signed that said that if there was a major incident, we would leave class or leave whatever it is that we were doing to go help with the residence halls. And so I took that paper to one of my professors. All of our professors had to sign it. So I took that paper to one of my professors. And I'll never forget that this particular professor, after I told him the situation, sat back in his chair and said, "Even our brightest clinicians don't do well when they have a job." This was my first interaction with this professor. It was the first time they had ever met me. And I remember kind of looking at them like, sign the paper. Like, I don't have a choice. You don't have a choice. And I didn't ask for commentary. And so I took it to 2 I took that same paper to two of my other professors, and they both had me as an undergrad student. And so one of the professors said, oh, Karina, I wish that you didn't have to work, but I understand. And anything that I can do, please let me know. And so she signed the paper. And the third professor said, it was like really kind of endearing because it was the last signature that I needed. But she said, Karina, if anybody can do it, it's you. Like if anybody has to juggle this many balls, like you're going to do it and you'll be fine. And so it was in that moment that I felt like, okay, I got this. And at this point, I think we were like the third passing in of like people in my life who were beginning to pass away. It was like the third person. I ended up doing pretty well, but not without support. So when I was a senior, right before I entered into the graduate program, I asked Dr. Frances Palmaville to be my mentor. I had become a McNair Scholar, and so as a part of the McNair Scholar program, they ready you to become a doctorate level studier, academic. And so I knew that at some point I also wanted to get my doctorate degree, and so I knew that they also would help me with research. And I also knew ahead of time that I wanted to write a thesis as my culminating experience. And so I wanted to get as much for free as I could from the McNair program, which ended up being really great at Fresno State. Shout out to the McNair program.
Nice.
And so you needed somebody to be your mentor. And so Fran ended up agreeing to be my mentor. So she would come with me every now and then to meetings, and she would just kind of help me along the way. And little did I know in the moment that I asked her that she would become more than an academic mentor to me, and she would also become a personal mentor. So the summer between the time that I graduated undergrad and started graduate school is when my dad abruptly passed away. And so she ended up supporting me a lot through the transition of that and like starting the actual grad program. And I had started my new job as a resident director. And so she was really wonderful in just knowing that I had her in the background for support. And so I was actually I did okay. I didn't need too much extra from anybody. And that was really nice. So I went on to graduate from Fresno State, 5 years in undergrad, 2 years in grad school. And I ended up moving home. So like my mom and my family, of course, were all here in Oakland. And my high school sweetheart was in Oakland. So I went away to college, but he stayed. He stayed and he lived at home, and he took a different track to his career. And so I wanted to be closer to them, primarily to my family and to my now husband. And so I ended up moving home, and I moved in with my mom. It was just my mom living there at the time. I think, and my brother was there too. And so I ended up moving back home, and a few months later, my now husband proposed. And so we, essentially started life. And so I ended up applying to a job, and the first job that I applied to, I got it. And so I still work there. I love it. This is my 6th year. I work at a high school in Pacifica, so it's a little bit of a commute, but I love the school that I work at. It's a small school, only of I think about 600 students, and the curriculum is highly focused on social justice.
Yes.
And so, yes! And so they're quite in line with who I was as a person and who I wanted to grow to be. And the students that I serve, there's an actual program that exists there for students who are on a certificate track as opposed to a diploma track. And they have 3 classrooms and they have 3 teachers. And I really loved the students that I were going to be working with were actually being challenged academically, and that there was significant rigor to their program, and that people were in the same kind of school of thought that I was in. So I decided on AAC because our district hired an AAC specialist to come into the classroom and conduct an AAC assessment with one of our students. And so that person came. They mostly programmed the device, but but not really. They gave the device to the student, and then they never came back. I found out later that our district had paid this company or this person, I'm not really sure, but they paid $5,000 for that. And then they did it again. And still, myself and my colleagues and the teachers were all still stuck. What do we do with this thing? And the reality is that even when we're using AAC, AAC is still just language treatment, but with an AAC device. But the difficulty was programming a device, choosing a device. I mean, what do? We had no idea, and it felt really scary as a second year SLP. And so for some financial reasons to the district, and for a desire, when I think about like why I chose to become an SLP to begin with, which was to be able to help people communicate, I decided that I would pursue AAC. I think that as a part of our regular curriculum, especially at the graduate program, but even at the undergraduate program, I believe that the field would benefit significantly from taking classes in cultural humility. And so I think that we would all be better off if everybody had to take a class, and even just around increasing their awareness, for cultural humility, and not even just cultural understanding. Like, you can't always understand somebody's culture from your own intersectionalities. And the point isn't always to understand every single culture all the time. I'm not sure that that's 100% possible. But if you have cultural humility, you're able to meet people where they are and be willing to learn from those people so that you can best serve them. And so I'll never forget that an SLP came in. She was telling us about one of her students on her caseload. So as she's telling us a story about the student, to me at least, it became clear just like a couple minutes in that she was talking about a student that either identified as Black or African American. And so the student also had autism. And so one of the things that they often teach us to in graduate school is to work with the family on the goals that they want for their children. And so most practitioners will ask the families like, well, what do you want your child to work on? Here's my opinion. What can we do together to get your kid to where they're going? And so this particular individual was telling us a story about this kid with autism who had some behaviors and needed language support and needed like different areas of support that of course the speech language pathologist could provide intervention in. And so as this woman is telling the story, she goes on to say to us that the mom requested that the students work on, or that her kid works on saying TH. And so she looks at the entire class. I'm sitting in the class. She looks at the entire class and she says, "You guys, what do we know about the African American population and TH?" So me and my classmates are looking at each other like, what is this woman talking about?
Yeah, where is she going with
this? Where is she going with this? And so she goes on to say, they don't use TH. And what? I like gasped, and I was like, oh my gosh. And so then this woman, she like continues to talk, and as she's telling the story, at some point she like puts out her hand toward me, like open hand. And as she's telling the story, she tells us eventually that the student identifies as African American. And then she says, "Don't worry, I'm not looking at you." And I was so upset. I was like, so upset. And then my teacher who was teaching the class didn't say anything and didn't do anything about it. And I remember being really upset by it. And it wasn't until like maybe 2 or 3 years ago that I could tell the story without like crying, because it was so upsetting. I like left class that day like crying, and I went home. I actually had another class after that. And I was like, I can't actually learn. Like, I can't sit in the class for 3 hours and learn, because like not only did this woman come into like my class and microaggress me, but like my peers didn't say or do anything, my teacher didn't say or do anything, and like what does that mean for me? And so I feel like it's really important, like I was talking about earlier, to have these conversations around cultural humility and to have these classes so that things like that don't happen. Like I missed out on some education that like I was paying for out of my pocket because I couldn't sit in class and sustain.
You were talking about microaggressions, and I think some people don't really understand what that means. Can you explain what microaggressions are?
Yeah, microaggressions are like the subtle indignities that are said to, or like placed upon, or given to people. And so I recently, maybe in the last couple of years, I watched a video where microaggressions were being compared to mosquito bites. And so the idea with microaggressions are, one, impact versus intent, and two, kind of like, I like the mosquito bite reference because with microaggressions, sometimes they happen to people every now and then. And so I'm speaking more toward racial microaggressions, but of course there are other types of microaggressions too. So just last week I was at work, and so as you all know, I work on a school campus. And so a mom came into the office. She was really upset. And I walked through the door because I think I needed to like make copies. So I walked through the door to the office, and this woman shouted through the window, "Your attendance, are you the attendance lady?" And I was like, "Nope." And so thankfully one of the people that worked in the front, she's like, "That's not the attendance lady." She's like, "You need to sit down," to the lady. But, it was microaggressive because this woman assumed, instead of like being on a school campus and at least first assuming that I was a teacher, assumed that like I was the attendance lady. And so it's microaggressive because she didn't believe that I could be one of the degree holders on campus. Mm-hmm. And so I had papers in my hand and all kinds of indicators to believe that I was at least a teacher. She probably would have never guessed that I was a speech pathologist, but she didn't think that. Sometimes the emotional labor is hard. In my pursuit of like serving others, a lot of the times I advocate for clients, and a lot of the times this means, like calling their other educators, calling their other therapists, and calling the other people in their lives to talk about like, how the students are doing, and to advocate for them in ways that sometimes the students and clients don't feel like they can say to them, but feel like they can say to me. And so sometimes that gets tiring. And so sometimes I refill my cup by being a part of this group called Sisters.
Hey,
so one
shout
of my
out to
good
Sisters.
friends, shout out Lucia, and then a couple other now friends and colleagues in the field, and I would get together. And so thankfully the group has like grown and grown and grown, and we have found like a ton of other people. And so I really, really fill my cup like professionally, and even sometimes personally through these women.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also fill my cup through just like, like hanging out with my husband and my family. I live with my husband and my mom, and so I get to spend a lot of time with them. And my siblings come in they're in all different parts of the United States. And so when they come in, like I just talk to them and we hang out. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the times too, I nerd out on like speech related stuff. And so right now I'm nerding out on AAC. And so I spend a lot of the time doing that and then building my private practice. And I enjoy cooking. So I cook and I bake. And that's really what I do, like for the most part. And I travel. I definitely feel like speech pathology is exactly where I need to be. I feel like super, super, super grateful to have found and fell in love with this field like at such a young age, like when I was in graduate school. Of course it was like with the work that I did around interning or shadowing. It wasn't interning, but shadowing, which is what got me here. A lot of the work that I did to prepare me to be in this very place is what got me to this very place. And so I want to give speech pathology that. It is my bread and butter. It is the way that I serve others, and it is what I enjoy the most, and I could never imagine myself doing something different, especially because there's so many scopes of practice where you can like change a scope and feel like you're doing something totally new, but you're still a speech pathologist. Mm-hmm. I love it so much. I would tell my younger self to take up all the space.
Yes.
I think I would tell my younger self that I belong to be in every place that I'm in, that I deserve to be there, and that I get to that I get to make mistakes and it's okay, and that when I'm making mistakes that I'm not really representing everybody, that it's okay to be who you want to be, and that it's nobody's job to tell you what you should be like or act like or do. And that not everybody will understand you, and that's okay. And it's also not your job to educate everybody all the time about who you are.